Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this presentation. My name is Matthew. I'm one of the technical advisors for the Technical and Building Regulations Unit at the VBA. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the preparation process and the requirements for this year's new application submissions for prescribed timber structures. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we met today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending the session today. What we'll cover in this presentation is some of the recent changes to the new application submissions this year and a basic run through of what is the expectations that are required for documents to be submitted under the application checklist, and also which you can find this link on the VBA website. Which I'll provide that link at the end of this presentation. It may also be noted that I can't talk about everything that's required, so what I've done instead is, for the purpose of this presentation, I've selected some key changes and things to look out for when providing a new application submission. I've also provided some useful tips as well to assist with the process and help save time and prevent the process from dragging out a little bit longer than it needs to. So recent changes. One of the main changes as of the 1st of May 2023 of this year was the National Construction Code 2022 came into effect, which has updated most of the provisions. As an example on the slide, you can see common provisions such as C110 and Spec C110 under the NCC Volume 1 is now being replaced, as you can see on the slide, with C2D11 and Spec 7. This was commonly applied to floor linings and walls and ceiling linings in the past. What was previously also VIC H102.2 provision has now become VIC I5D3. Applicants will need to make sure that the latest applicable provisions have been complied with under the NCC 2022 version in their new applications. As a result of a new Construction Code 2022, other changes also need to be taken into consideration with new applications. These changes include new applications to be in accordance with the latest updated standards and adopted standards under the NCC 2022. One of these standards includes the new wind action standard used by the endorsed engineers to calculate the wind loading. Under AS 1170 Part 2 2021 is the new standard. Currently we're still getting applications that are coming into us at the moment under the 2011 standard. We can no longer accept this as under the normal compliance pathway. Engineers or the applicants will need to consider doing a performance solution if they want to use the previous standard. Endorsed engineers will need to make sure that they design the computations to the latest standards. There's also a new glazing standard, AS 1288 2021. So this now means that applicants need to make sure that the installation and design of any glazing in any of the structures need to be designed in accordance with that latest standard. So when you submit a certificate, a glazing certificate, this will need to be in accordance with the 2021 standard if you're using that standard. Other standards to be aware of is also the Steel Structures Standard 2020. Another change that may have an effect on new submissions is not having a fire test certificate that complies with the current adopted versions under the National Construction Code 2022. This doesn't happen that often, but it's worth noting for new applications. Since the National Construction Code 2022 came into effect, this now means that all fire test certificates must comply with the current version of AS or New Zealand 1530 versions of the standard. These dates I've listed on the slides, as you can see. If an applicant happens to have a fire test certificate done under an older version of the standard, testing will need to be carried out again under the current applicable standard, or they will need to consider getting a fire engineering report done by the competent fire engineer. As an example of this, if the fire test certificate for demonstrating flammability index was provided under AS 1530 Part 2 version prior to the 12th of July 1993, the flammability test will need to be carried out again to the latest standard. Just a reminder to applicants that we're still getting applications with the older Certificate of Compliance certificates, which are no longer in the form approved by the VBA. Just a quick note to make sure that all certificates should be signed by the endorsed engineer and have the endorsed engineer registration number at the bottom of the certificate as well. As we know, engineers are no longer considered as building practitioners under the legislation since the 10th of November 2020. So make sure that you've got endorsed engineer registration number on the certificate. Prescribed temporary structure determination. This is probably one of the most important parts of the whole application process that applicants need to be aware of from the beginning. For every application, all submissions need to be determined as a prescribed temporary structure for the VBA to issue an occupancy permit under Part 5 Division 2 of the Building Act 1993. The first part of the determination is whether structures meet the requirements as shown on Regulation 207 on this slide. For example, is the submission for a tent or marquee with a floor area greater than 100 metres squared? If any structures do not have a floor area as determined on this slide, it's highly unlikely that you will need a permit from the VBA. There is, however, an exception with modular structures. If the modular structures are going to be joined together to create a floor area that is greater than the following, then in that situation you will require a VBA permit. The second part to prescribed temporary structure determinations is whether the entertainment carried out is providing the owner of the structure with any direct money, interest in the proceeds and profits, or are they getting any fees or rewards from the public entertainment? If the event is free, for example, like a charity community public event, where the owner of the structure is not making any profits, arguably this does not fit within the definition of conducting an event under Section 49, and approval in this situation may only need to be run past the relevant council, and a permit will usually not be required by the VBA in that situation. Another key part of the determination for a prescribed temporary structure is related to the use of a structure. Structures that are used solely for selling products or retail use, dining or bar use only, or further private use only, are not considered to be prescribed temporary structures. We commonly get inquiries in relation to tents or marquees for private wedding receptions or produce selling only. Even if they're over the prescribed size under Regulation 207, as described in the earlier slide, the use of a structure is not for the purpose of public entertainment and therefore does not require a permit from the VBA. An example in the slide relating to the wedding or the wedding reception. While there may be some entertainment in the marquee, the VBA considers these events private events, more private functions and not public entertainment events. Another example we get a lot of inquiries on is where the marquee is set up in a large entertainment event where they use the structure only for product selling. While the structure might be set up at a public event, the structure itself is not used for public entertainment itself, so therefore does not require a permit from the VBA in that situation either. Please also note that prescribed temporary structures, being temporary structures, should not be erected longer than 6 months. So we strongly advise that where a structure requires to be erected more than 6 months, that we strongly advise that you go down the pathway, or the owner goes down the pathway of looking into getting a building permit from a private building surveyor or a relevant council in that situation. Other important notes that need to be considered by the applicant is that the VBA does not consider structures that are erected within, on or attached to a permanent building as prescribed temporary structures. Common situation we often get is applications for marquee shelters that are attached to a permanent seating stand. This is not considered a prescribed temporary structure, with the marquee word to be attached to another seating stand which happened to be a prescribed temporary structure, in that situation we would assess that and a permit would be required. Further help with the determination, as we understand sometimes it's not always straightforward, you can also contact us directly via the PTS VBA or temporary structures inbox. These details are also listed at the end of the presentation. Once a determination has been made that it is in fact a prescribed temporary structure, all information now needs to be provided in accordance with the application checklist, which you can find on the VBA prescribed temporary structure web page. But what are these requirements? Drawings. This includes both the full set of architectural drawings and structural drawings with all the required information listed on them for the technical advisor to determine compliance with the structure. We also encourage conceptual drawings as well. Some examples shown on the slide are examples of details that are often missed with submitted drawings. We often get staircase drawings without the measurements correctly listed for the goings, the risings, the gradients, and the spacings in between the steps. Barriers are often submitted without the vertical and the bottom rail spacing measurements as well too. So if you don't know what the spacing is, I've just shown that on the diagram as you can see what I mean by the spacings on those drawings. One of the examples that catches most applicants out is the seating stands that are requirements for barriers, the seating stand requirements for barriers which abuts the seat. More commonly, the requirements for the rear barriers against the back row of the seats. Requirements under VIC I5D3D of the National Construction Code 2022. This was previously VIC H102.2. Requires the barrier to be measured from the seat base or plat, whichever the highest, when no aisle separating the seat and the barrier. Therefore, compliance measurements should be shown in the situation from the seat base as shown in the diagram. However, where the floor of the seating stand is actually higher than 4 metres than the ground, above the ground surface beneath the National Construction Code D3D20 subsection 1, previously table D216A, requires there are no elements to facilitate climbing between 150 mils and 760 mils above the floor. This can often mean that the rear back of the seat can be of conflict. In this situation, we strongly advise that the barrier is extended up further to mitigate the risk of falling. Another requirement for all submission is making sure that all the certificates are being provided. This includes all fire test certificates for wall, roof, coverings and linings, floor linings, and when using hard walls, make sure you've got a fire test certificate for the hard walls as well too. We often get submissions for roof coverings and linings where only one of the certificates are being provided. Applicants need to make sure that both the current AS 1530 Part 2 and AS New Zealand Standard 1530 Part 3 fire test certificates are being provided, and also that those certificates demonstrate that it complies with the required fire hazard properties. Other certificates include Engineer Certificate of Compliance for both structural and, when required, a fire engineering designs from the competent endorsed engineers, and also making sure that where glazing is to be used, that the glazing certificate is provided that is evidence that the glazing has been installed and designed in accordance with both, or either AS 1288 2021 and AS 2047 glazing standard. Glazing certificates are often missed in new application submissions. Engineers are reminded to make sure that all computations are being provided for application submissions. Some commonly missed computations are providing all hold down computations. Sometimes not all the hold down options are being put in and may have been accidentally left out, or computations for detailing requirements for the hold downs may be missing as well too. Other times we find that computations for either or both base plates and sol plates have been missed or left out, and this also applies to rigging live loads. Rigging being like the lighting and PA systems being hung on the structure. These are commonly missed in a lot of applications. Applicants advise where other missed hold down options, either no pegs, no ballasts, or footings, or no requirements for sol plates or riggings are required for the particular structure in that submission, to make sure you detail this in the application submission, either in the computations or within like the application form is okay as well too. It'll save a lot of hassle down the track. One of the most common items that are missed in submissions is often the performance solution. And this is required when the structure can't meet the deemed satisfied provisions of the Temporary Structure Standard 2015 or the National Construction Code 2022. Two of the most common performance solutions that we often get are in the form of a wind management plan or a fire engineering report. Where the structure can't meet the wind loading requirements, also including applying the reduction factor under Table 3.3.3 from Temporary Structure Standard 2015, this often requires a wind management plan. This is best to discuss with the structural engineer to make sure that they, if they choose or can't meet, if they can't meet the requirements or they choose not to meet the requirements, to make sure that they also submit the wind management plan as well too. The other performance solution that is often required in the submission is the fire engineering report. Applicants are reminded where all fire test certificates cannot be provided, or they are provided and they can't demonstrate compliance. This can often trigger the requirements of a fire engineering report and also the certificate of compliance form to be submitted from the independent fire engineer. As shown in the slide, I've shown some of the triggers that might trigger off a fire engineering report, and that's detailed in the diagram as you can see. Please note where wall covering cannot be tested under AS 1530 Part 2 for example, the material is thicker than 2 millimeters and can't be bent around the mandrel, or AS New Zealand Standard 1530 Part 3 in the example where it's a material that's considered to be a hydrocarbon material such as PVC or polycarbonate, which can't be tested because of the melting of the material. This doesn't necessarily mean that you need a fire engineering report. There is another option that you can comply with. The other option that you can comply with is under the NCC 2022. You can comply with C2D11 and Spec 7 or S7C4 under the National Construction Code. It was previously C110 and Spec C110. Then you may not require the fire engineering report. This is often for hard walling materials that if they're determined as a Group 1 or Group 2 material under AS 5637 Part 1, as well as meet the S7C4 requirements, or simply determined as a non-combustible material, this is where the FER may not be required. But if it's to be, as you can see in the diagram, a Group 3 material, or simply you can't make the material comply, then you might have to look at getting a fire engineering report, or additionally you might have to think about choosing a different material. Some useful tips. I provided the list shown of some of the useful tips to assist with helping the submission process and saving time in the application process. One example of this is shown on the slide. In this case, for a stage and platform application or a submission, stating from the start whether it's to be used by performers only or it is intended to be used for the public as well. This means that the technical advisor doesn't have to go back over the assessment again, costing all parties much more time. as there are slightly different requirements for barrier and live loading for performer use only under the Temporary Structure Standard 2015 for a stage and platform. Some other useful tips are to make sure that everything is provided in one submission. Preferably using like the Dropbox method is really good, but try to avoid submitting something one day and then submitting the rest of the information the following week, for example, because it just makes things so much longer to put everything together. So another good tip is to making sure that the design changes have all been completed prior to submitting the application as well too. That saves us going over the assessment all over again from start. Providing a description of the structure in as much detail as possible on the application form can be really useful during both the assessment and the occupancy permit drafting phase. If a structure is modular, for example, make sure that this is mentioned as well on the application form. Most importantly, please make sure that all submissions that are ready are submitted as early as possible before any event, as the team is always under a lot of demand. This will help take the pressure off all parties involved with the process, including the owners, and prevent running into the possibility of not getting the occupancy permit in on time as well before the event. For more information on the prescribed temporary structure application process, please feel free to contact us directly via the VBA temporary structure inbox, or you can just go to the VBA prescribed temporary structure website. And on that website is also the general application submission information, and also documents and forms that need to be filled out for the purpose of the submission. I've also provided the QR scan code as well, which might make it a bit easier to find the website. I hope this presentation provided some clarity around some of the things to look out for, and we wish all applicants the very best in putting the submissions together. Thank you so much for your time.